The North had never forgotten. Not the Red Wedding, not the fall of House Stark, and certainly not the broken oaths that soaked the riverlands with innocent blood. Years had passed since Robb Stark's body was hacked and desecrated, his dire head sewn crudely onto his corpse for mockery. The Freys feasted while the crows fed on the young wolf's remains. But the gods were not silent. Somewhere far beyond the wall, in the bitter wind and the endless night, something ancient stirred. Old magic, dark magic, something that had been sleeping for thousands of years, now calling for vengeance. In the icy depths of a cave forgotten by men, 3 cloaked figures stood in a circle around a frozen pool of blood. One was a child with no eyes, humming softly in a tongue that no one remembered. The second was a woman with skin pale as snow, her fingers twitching like she was pulling invisible strings. And the third was a giant of a man, hooded, silent, holding a wolf's skull in both hands. They spoke not to each other, but to the old gods. And the old gods listened. That night, deep under the frost-covered ruins of an old northern tower, Robb Stark's bones stirred. His hands blackened, and claw-like broke through the earth. His blue eyes, glowing with ice fire, opened for the first time in years. But he wasn't just a man anymore. He was something else. Now, something colder, something angrier. A ghost king back in Winterfell. Arya Stark stood atop the walls, feeling a shiver run down her spine. She was no stranger to death, no stranger to revenge. But that night, as the wind howled like a crying wolf, she felt like something old and terrible was coming home, far to the south. The Freys were dying, not in battle, not by poison, but one by one, their blood drained, their bodies frozen stiff in their sleep. And carved into every wall near each body was a single word written in old northern runes: the wolf rises. Rumors spread like wildfire. The Hound, now a wandering warrior, heard tales of a white rider on a ghostly steed seen near the neck, riding with a pack of wolves that walked like men. Tormund Jonspane spoke of a creature in the night who called the dead wolves to him like brothers. And Bran Stark, the 3-eyed raven, felt his dreams haunted by a figure with his brother's face, but no warmth, no breath, no soul. Jon Snow refused to believe it. "My brother is dead," he told Sam at Castle Black. "He's at peace." But Sam wasn't so sure. In one of the oldest books in the Citadel, he had found something half legend, half prophecy. A tale of the Frost Wolf King, a northern soul who would rise in death when the blood of his kin cried out from the grave, and all of Westeros would tremble under his cold rage. Jon didn't want to believe, but then came the raven, its feathers rimmed with ice, its message simple: the North remembers, and so does the wolf. And suddenly he did believe, because only one man would send that message, and he had died with a wolf's head sewn to his body. Snow fell harder in the riverlands, coating the twisted branches and muddy paths with thick white silence. But this was no ordinary snowfall. The air didn't just chill the bones it gnawed at them. Small folk whispered of villages that vanished overnight, their fires frozen solid, livestock found standing still, eyes wide open in death. At the heart of it all, the name whispered in fear was the same: Robb Stark. But the Robb Stark who walked now did not speak. His breath did not fog in the air, for he had none. His heart did not beat, and his shadow moved before him, not behind. He rode a war horse, black as a moonless night, its hooves silent even on stone. And around him marched a company of the dead silent, frostbitten, loyal. Soldiers who had died at the Twins, bannermen who once swore the dire wolf sigil, men who followed Robb Stark in life, and in death answered his call again. Their armor was rusted, their eyes pale and empty, but they moved with purpose. They moved for vengeance at the twins. Walder Frey's sons laughed and drank, boasting of how the North had been broken, how the young wolf had died with his mother screaming and his wife bleeding. They wore wolf's cloaks taken from dead soldiers and drank from goblets carved with Stark's names. But on the 12th night of winter, their laughter stopped. The wine turned to ice in their cups. The fires went out, though no wind blew, and the youngest Frey, a boy no older than 12, screamed in the dark halls, "He's here." They found the boy dead in the morning, his mouth wide open, filled with snow, eyes turned to ice. That night, Robb Stark walked through the gates of the twins. The guards saw nothing, just the snowstorm coming. But when the storm passed, the gate was broken and no one left breathing inside. Just frozen corpses, standing like statues, with their eyes turned toward the north. And above them, hanging from the rafters by wolf entrails, was a message written in blood. The king in the north returns. In Winterfell, Sansa Stark felt her chamber grow colder by the hour. The hearth blazed, but gave no warmth. Ghost, Jon's direwolf, howled long and loud in the night, ears flat, hackles raised. Bran said nothing, but his dreams were filled with visions of snow falling upward and a crown of ice forming on a pale forehead. Arya stood on the battlements again, eyes on the horizon. She didn't know why, but her hand kept drifting to Needle's hilt. "You feel it too, don't you?" she said to no one. Down in the crypts, the air was heavier. Even the statues of the old kings of winter seemed to lean forward, listening. When the torches flickered, Maester Walken whispered, "There is something wrong in the north. The dead stir." Jon Snow had never ridden faster. He left Castle Black with 6 men and returned alone. The men he took were all warriors. Some had faced White Walkers, but none of them survived what waited in the Dreadfort ruins, Ramsay Bolton's old stronghold. The castle, long abandoned, had been coated in frost. Not just snow, but thick ice, covering the stone-like armor inside. They found bones, hundreds of them. Wolves, hounds, men. But the bones were clean. White, as if something ancient had feasted and left only silence behind. Jon found one door still warm, one room not yet frozen, and on the walls were drawings childlike, scratched with bloody fingernails. A wolf, a crown, a weeping woman, a message. The war never ended. Jon dropped to one knee, heart heavy. "Robb, what have they done to you?" Behind him, a breath. He could not hear, a shadow on the wall, though no one stood there, and a voice, more felt than heard. "You let them kill me, brother." Jon spun around, sword drawn, but the room was empty. Only ice remained. Only pain far beyond the wall. The night fort awoke, once a black ruin. Feared even by wildlings, the castle now shimmered with frost. The snow never settled on its towers, any more it melted, then froze mid-air, caught in strange patterns. A raven sat on the highest tower, eyes milky white. Not Bran's, not blood ravens. This raven saw deeper. It spoke not with words, but with silence, and from the bowels of the fortress, where light had not touched for centuries, rose a whispering hummer sound like wolves singing beneath the earth. The north, they said, had crowned a new king, a ghost king, not a White Walker, not a white something else, something older, a king with a soul but no warmth, a heart but no mercy, a king who remembered betrayal, who remembered his mother's screams. his unborn child lost in his wife's belly, his bannermen kneeling in false loyalty, who remembered the twins and the Freys and the Boltons, and who had returned not for his throne, but for judgment. The people began to flee south, not because they saw him, but because they felt him. Ravens flew in circles, hounds refused to hunt, cows stopped giving milk, and women miscarried in their sleep. Priests of the Seven spoke of the end times. Red priests whispered that Azor Ahai had failed, and the North had birthed a colder god. Even Cersei Lannister, drunk and mad in King's Landing, woke one night screaming of a wolf with no eyes staring. From her balcony in Old Town, the maesters burned old scrolls in the Vale. Birds froze mid-dash flight. In Braavos, the many-faced god turned silent and still. Robb Stark marched, not speaking, not slowing. His sword was not steel. It was frozen northern iron, etched with runes from the children of the forest, sharpened by grief. His eyes looked past the living. His crown was snow, and his rage was just beginning. The sky over the north had changed. It no longer turned orange at dawn, nor did birds sing in the trees. The sun still rose, but weak and pale, as if it, too, feared to shine over what the north was becoming. A deep fog spread across the hills and valleys, moving like a living thing, swallowing entire villages without a whisper. They called it the wolf's breath, a cold mist that crept into lungs and froze men where they stood, and wherever it settled, so did the whispers of the dead. At Carhold, the last of the Karstarks barred the gates, praying to the old gods and new. But prayers didn't matter. When the frost reached the gate, the hinges cracked with an awful scream of metal. No sword was drawn. No battle was fought. Only silence by morning. Carhold was nothing but a ruin of snow-covered corpses' arms, reaching mouths open, eyes wide in terror. In the center courtyard stood a sigil not raised since the War of the Five Kings. The direwolf of House Stark, painted in ash and frozen blood. In Winterfell, the cold was no longer just weather. It was alive. The walls groaned. The floors creaked without footsteps. Even the weirwood tree in the Godswood once, a place of calm now, bled sap that smoked in the cold air. Maester Walken fled one night, swearing the tree whispered Robb's name with every drop. Bran Stark sat beneath that tree more than anyone. He no longer spoke. His eyes, once distant, now glowed faintly with something unnatural. Even Arya couldn't reach him. He's trying to speak to something, she told Sansa, or someone. Sansa's face was pale. What do you mean? Arya hesitated. I think Robb's not just returning. He's calling the North back. Sansa shook her head. Back from what? Arya looked at her, and for the first time Sansa saw fear in her sister's eyes. Back from death. South of Moat Cailin, Lord Edmure, Tully's bannermen were ambushed, not by Lannisters or Ironburn, but by shadows in the mist, riders who didn't bleed, wolves with hollow eyes. By dawn, only their armor remained, frozen in place with no flesh inside. Edmure locked himself in Riverrun, trembling with a truth he couldn't admit. Robb Stark had come back, and he was not the man he buried. One night, Edmure dreamed of the Red Wedding, only this time, Robb didn't die. He rose from the feast table, the wolf's head falling away to reveal a pale face, eyes glowing blue. His voice cracked through the air like thunder. I gave you a crown, you gave me a knife. Edmure awoke in tears and in frost. His chamber windows were sealed shut. The fire had frozen into ice. and carved into the wooden door were words that hadn't been spoken in years. The North remembers. Beyond the veil, Lady Lyanna, Mormont headstrong, brave, unbending, had led her warriors south to answer a call she claimed came in a dream. "I saw him," she said. "He stood on a mountain of bones. He is our king, and he is still fighting." Men laughed, but followed her, not because of her dream, but because none of them could deny the dread in the air. And in the north, dread was a warning. They marched for the Berrowlands, where stories claimed the Ghost King had passed. There, Lyanna found something no one could explain. Graves' ancient northern tombs were empty, from forgotten chieftains. 2 old kings, their bones were gone, dug up not by thieves, but as if the dead had risen themselves. And standing at the highest hill was a sword, plunged into the earth, rimmed with frost. Lyanna touched it. She screamed. Her men rushed forward, but it was too late. She stood rigid, eyes turned white, lips whispering one word again and again: Robb. Back in Winterfell, Bran Stark stirred from one of his visions. He stood from his chair, slowly, and walked without help, something he hadn't done in years. Arya and Sansa found him in the crypts, standing before Robb's empty tomb. "It's him," Bran said. Sansa's breath caught. "Is he alive?" "No," Bran answered, voice hollow, "but he is waking." Arya stepped forward. "Can he be stopped?" Bran shook his head. "He isn't coming for power. He's coming for debt. For every oath broken, every betrayal buried in snow." He turned to face them, eyes glowing faintly. The North gave birth to something, ... new. Not death, not life, judgment. They stood in silence, the air heavy with cold . And then they heard it, a distant howl, not of a direwolf, but of something deeper. Older it echoed through the stones, through their bones at King's Landing. Queen Daenerys, now seated on the Iron Throne after the ashes settled, received word of northern chaos. 12 messages, all saying the same thing: "He walks again." She didn't believe it. "Dead men don't march," she said to Tyrion. Tyrion, who had once drunk and joked through every threat in the realm, simply looked at her. "Maybe not," he said, "but vengeance does." Jon Snow stood behind her, silent. He didn't speak, because deep inside him something knew. He had seen death, served it, walked with it. But this wasn't death. This wasn't the Night King. This was personal. This was Robb. And he wasn't bringing winter. He was bringing reckoning. They heard the drums before they saw him, but no one played them. No hands, no skin, just echoes carried on the wind low, thunderous, like the beating of a heart too large to belong to any man. It came from the woods outside Deepwood Motte, where the trees stood black with frost. Their leaves turned to glass. Lady Glover stood on the ramparts, gripping the stone, her knuckles white. Her men muttered prayers, not to the Seven, not even to the old gods, but to the name they no longer dared speak aloud. He had returned, and the North had risen with him. The woods fell silent, and then he stepped through the trees. Robb Stark, but not the boy they remembered, not the young king with a proud jaw and kind eyes. This was something colder, taller, thinner, deathly pale, cloaked in ice. His direwolf grey wind now, a monstrous, skeletal beast rimmed with frost, walked beside him. And behind him came the dead, not mindless corpses, not wights. These were Northmen, dressed in furs and armor, bearing the banners of houses long lost, Umber, Mormont, Tallheart. and they marched as if they still had breath in their lungs, as if their hearts still beat for one name. Stark, the gates of Deepwood Motte swung open without force. Lady Glover fell to her knees in the snow, tears freezing. To her cheeks, "My king," she whispered. Robb did not speak. His eyes were glowing shards of winter, but he nodded once, and the wind howled with approval. That night, Deepwood Motte became his. The North wasn't just remembering, it was surrendering in White Harbour. Lord Wyman Manderley saw ships returning. From the sea-ghost ships, silent, sails torn, covered in rime. Not a soul aboard, yet the ships docked themselves as if guided by invisible hands. Inside the hulls were coffins, old, sealed ones, some from Winterfell, some from Bear Island, some older still, carved in the style of the first men, Manderley ordered. Them burned, but fire would not take. The coffins were ice-bound. Nothing inside moved, but in his dreams that night, Wyman heard scratching, like fingers on wood, like claws. He woke, choking on seawater inside his own chambers. A single message was carved into the frost on his mirror. Swear again. By morning, he declared for Robb Stark. Dead or alive, he no longer cared. Sansa stood in the great hall of Winterfell, her hand trembling as she clutched the raven scroll from White Harbour. One by one, the northern lords were falling back under Robb's banner. Even in death, he was uniting them. But she knew what was coming. This wasn't loyalty, it was fear. Arya paced near the fire, her eyes sharp, restless. "We have to speak to him." Sansa shook her head. "He's not our brother anymore." Arya turned sharply. "He was, and maybe some part of him still is." "No," Sansa said. "He was a boy who wanted peace. This thing, this king, he wants punishment, and if we're not careful, we'll be next." Down in the crypts, Bran touched the cold stone where Robb's tomb once lay. His eyes rolled back, visions flooding through him like lightning. He saw Robb standing atop a hill of bones, a sword of pure northern ice in hand, but Bran also saw something else, a shadow behind Robb, something darker, older, whispering, far in the reach. Queen Daenerys Targaryen read the growing reports of frost spreading from the neck upward. No one had marched past Moat Cailin in months, and yet the lands below it were freezing. Entire rivers stopped flowing. Trees cracked in half from the cold. Crops failed, and people whispered of wolves walking like men, of a king with no heartbeat, and a voice that broke stone. She summoned her council. "Why hasn't he come south?" she asked Tyrion. "Because he doesn't want your throne," Tyrion said. Daenerys narrowed her eyes. "Then what does he want?" Tyrion hesitated. Reckoning, Jon Snow stood quietly behind them, jaw clenched. "Then I'll go to him," Jon said. "He's my brother." "No." Daenerys snapped. "He's not. Your brother died." Jon met her gaze. "Maybe, but I owe him more than anyone else alive." "You owe me," she said coldly. Jon looked away. He wasn't so sure anymore. At the edge of the frost line, just south of the Barrowlands, Robb Stark stood still as a statue. He hadn't moved in 2 days. The air around him shimmered with snowflakes that never touched the ground. Grey wind circled him like a ghost. His army waited behind him, silent, loyal, watching. A figure approached told bent, dragging a staff of weirwood. "The last green seer, Leaf. You remember," she said softly. Robb said nothing. "You came back. But you brought something with you. Still, He said nothing. She stepped closer. You've called the dead, but you don't speak to them, because you know they aren't all yours. Some follow another voice. His eyes flicked toward her, just slightly. You wear the crown, she whispered, but something else sits on your soul. Robb raised his hand and the earth cracked. Ice crawled through the soil, spreading toward her, but Leaf only smiled. You are not the end, she said. You are the beginning of something worse. He lowered his hand, because deep inside him, buried under rage and vengeance and frost, a boy still cried. A boy who watched his mother die. A boy who had loved and trusted and been betrayed. And that boy was beginning to fade at Winterfell. Bran woke, screaming for the first time in years. They're not just marching, he gasped. They're gathering. Sansa rushed to him. Who? The dead? No, Bran said, his breath shaking. The kings, all of them. Every Northman buried with a crown. They're rising, Arya paled. Why? Bran looked toward the window, to sit behind Robb, on a throne made of bones. Snow never stopped falling now, not like before, where it came in flurries or storms. This snow was eternal. It didn't melt, it didn't swirl with the wind. It simply fell, slow and steady, like the sky itself was weeping without end. The north, with sealed shut. No bird flew across the neck. No rider passed Moat Cailin. The only thing that moved between the white trees and the frozen rivers was the growing shadow of the Ghost King, and still, Robb Stark did not speak. He did not need to. The north was already answering his silence with fealty. House Umber, House Umber, House Reed, House Hornwood. Even the scattered hill tribes each bent the knee, not with words, but with offerings. They dug up their own tombs and gave him their dead. They burned their old banners and raised the tattered sigil of the wolf again. Not out of loyalty, out of fear. At Castle Black, the Black brothers shivered in more than cold. Ravens stopped, returning, their food spoiled too fast. And 2 nights passed, a group of rangers went out and didn't come back. Their swords did, delivered by wolves. The blades were lined neatly at the foot of the gate. No blood, just the steel. As if someone was saying, you won't need these anymore. Seer Alliser Thorne stood watch, wrapped in furs, teeth clenched against the creeping dread. He'd faced Whitelings, White Walkers, even Jon Snow's resurrection. But this was different. There were no fires hot enough to fight it. And at midnight, the old horn blew. Not once, not twice, 3 times. They hadn't heard that sound since the days of the night. King Jon Snow rode alone. He'd said nothing to Daenerys when he left. No warnings, no farewells. He simply saddled his horse and rode north under moonlight. He didn't bring ghost, didn't bring men. He knew Robb wouldn't speak to soldiers, only to him. But as he crossed into the frost-covered northern wilds, Jon realized something strange. Time stopped, not literally, but it felt that way. Days didn't pass, his horse didn't tire, his beard didn't grow, the cold didn't bite. It was like he had entered some ancient, cursed place that existed beyond the rhythm of the world. And then he saw the trees, all burned black. Hundreds of them, surrounding a circle of frost where the snow didn't fall. And in the center of that circle stood Robb, crowned in ice-grey wind at his side, mouth dripping with steam. Jon dismounted, his heart beating so loud it echoed in his skull. Robb, the Ghost King, said nothing. His eyes shimmered with blue fire. And for a moment Jon felt a warmth, A memory dot them riding through the wolf's wood as boys, laughing, competing. Robb pulling John out of the lake when the ice cracked. Brothers' love, but it faded. John stepped closer. You don't have to do this. Still no answer. You were a king. You fought with honor. You stood for justice. Robb raised his hand. The frost stopped in mid-air, and then he spoke, for the first time since rising, but his voice was layered. Like dozens spoke through him all the dead Starks, all the old kings, all the wronged sons of winter. Honor died with me. Now there is only debt. John's breath caught. You're killing innocence. No one is innocent. They watched me die. They bowed to the phrase. They danced at weddings while my mother's throat was slit. His voice dropped lower, angrier. Where were you, John? John stepped back, wounded. I didn't know, you were my brother, and you buried your sword in her heart. Robb didn't mean Catelyn, he meant Daenerys. John's hand gripped his sword hilt. I didn't come to fight you. Then you came to kneel, and the ground cracked beneath John's feet. The snow turned to black ice. Dozens of eyes opened in the tree-stead wolves. Dead men, northern kings long buried, their gaze fixed on him, judging, watching. John fell to his knees, not in surrender, but in disbelief. You want to punish the world, he shouted. You think vengeance will bring you peace. There is no peace, Robb whispered. Not for the North, not for me. He stepped forward. Grey wind followed, teeth bared. John's fingers touched his sword again, but something in him refused to draw it. You're not the Robb I knew, he said. And for one flicker, one heartbeat, Robb's hand trembled, as if some part of him remembered. But then the cold surged forward again, and the memory died in winter. Bran Stark collapsed in the middle of the hall. He gasped for air, eyes glowing brighter than ever. I saw it, he whispered. I saw the true crown. Sansa knelt beside him. What crown? Bran's voice shook. He's not the only one. Rising, the North's past is coming with him. Kings we never buried. Kings we forgot. Arya paled. Why? Bran looked at her with sorrow. To reclaim what was stolen. One throne isn't enough anymore. They want it all. A new howl echoed across the walls. Not Robb. Something deeper. Something worse. And the snow turned red, as if the North itself had begun to bleed. Snow had swallowed the world. Not just the North, but the shape of it. Roads disappeared. Rivers froze to jagged scars in the earth. Castles that once stood proud were now tombs with frost-bitten banners. The line between day and night no longer mattered. The sky stayed the same grey, endless, grieving. But beneath all that silence, something moved. Not Robb Stark, something behind him. He had become a king of the dead, yes, but now he was no longer alone. Across the Barrowlands, where the oldest northern kings had once ruled before the Starks ever claimed Winterfell, the mounds broke open. Crowned skulls rose from beneath. Skeletons armored in rusted mail, their ribs laced with the remnants of fur and bone. These were not White Walkers. These were kings of the first men, the old wolves, and they marched not behind Robb, but with him, because he was no longer just a boy who'd been betrayed. He had become the herald, and they were here to claim what they'd lost, not a throne of stone and steel, but the soul of Westeros. In King's Landing, the snow began to fall for the first time in history. It fell gently at first. People laughed, touched it like it was a gift. By dusk, 5 had frozen to death in the streets. By dawn, The Red Keep's walls had cracks like veins running through them. Daenerys stood at the balcony, watching the city from her high tower. Drogon growled low beside her, tail twitching. Jon Snow had not returned. Ravens from the north stopped coming, and now the frost had reached the capital. "What do they want?" she asked Tyrion, her voice quiet, brittle. Tyrion, thinner now, no longer smug, no longer drunk, said only one word: revenge. "No," she said, "it's more than that." He looked at her. "You burned cities, they raise graves. The dead are colder, but not much different than you." She turned to him, slowly. "If I fall, you'll regret those words. If you don't fall," he said, "we all will." That night, fire spread through the lower city, not from rebels, but from people desperate to survive. They burned anything that could keep them warm, and from the smoke, some claimed they saw wolves walking upright, watching, waiting, in the crypts beneath Winterfell. Bran sat before a stone, long untouched, the crypt of Brandon the Builder, the first. Stark, the man who raised the wall, who founded Winterfell, who made pacts with the children of the forest when the world was still wild. Bran's eyes turned white as snow, and in the vision, he saw him, not Robb, but something older, a man with a crown of antlers and a sword made of weirwood and iron. A man who bled from the eyes but spoke without lips. His voice echoed across time. "You broke the pact." Bran shivered. "What pact?" "You were to remember, but you forgot. You swore to kneel to the earth, but you built thrones of fire." The ground shook, and the king leaned closer. "Now the earth kneels to us." Bran awoke choking. Sansa stood nearby, clutching a torch. "He's coming," Bran whispered. "No," she replied, "he's already here." Outside the walls of Winterfell, the snow turned black, and the sky began to split. In the Riverlands, Edmure Tully tried to rally what remained of the Southern Lords. It was too late. One by one, they were hunted not by armies, but by judgment. Men who had betrayed Robb Stark found their sons frozen in their beds. Castles that closed their gates to northern refugees turned into icebound prisons. Even the Freys were no longer corpses, they had become examples. Statues made of snow and bone posed at their long feast tables, eternally celebrating their treachery, and every time, above the scene, carved in ice, the North remembers. Some begged the faith for help, but the High Septon refused to speak. He was found frozen at the altar of the great Sept of Baelor, clutching a raven scroll, the words smeared in ink and blood. "Winter is not a season, it is a god." At the wall, the Night's Watch broke, not by force, by despair. They saw the march of the dead from atop the tower's waves of shadows, moving without sound. They lit the fires, blew the horns. No one came. Jon Snow returned alone, gaunt eyes hollow. He didn't speak for hours. When Sam found him, Jon simply whispered, "He's not Robb anymore. What is he?" Jon stared at the flames. "A storm in the shape of my brother." Daenerys mounted dragon at sunrise. The frost had reached the throne room. Her council was gone. Tyrion had vanished. Grey Worm's men fought shadows in the alleyways and lost. She flew toward the north, toward Winterfell, toward the eye of the storm, and in the sky. She saw it, a gathering unlike anything before. 10,000 wolves, dead and alive, kings with no tongues, and at the center, Robb Stark, his crown now fused with ice, his eyes glowing brighter than stars, his hand raised toward the sun. She screamed a command. Drogon roared, and he dove, fire met frost, and the world broke open. The final battle was not fought with armies, it was fought with memory. Every betrayal, every oath broken, every name carved in the walls of the crypt, they rose. And in the end, Robb Stark did not swing a blade, he simply watched. As the South, the East, and the West collapsed under the weight of forgotten sins, and then he turned back toward Winterfell, to the God's Wood, to his tomb, where he sat, finally, on a throne not made of swords, but of bone, the Ghost King, the last King. And from the highest tower, Bran looked down, not afraid, but understanding, because the world they had built on betrayal and fire could no longer stand, and winter would reign forever.